There we go. Hello and welcome to the Lewis Carroll Society of North America's virtual sculpture garden. Now today you and I are going to have the privilege to listen to two master sculptors talk about their Carrollian craft. We've got Karen Mortillaro and Bridgette Mongeon. And my name is Heather, by the way. Have I mentioned that? I have a website and a podcast called Alice is Everywhere, and I am the proud chairwoman of your Senior Common Room Curators. That is the LCSNA committee that brings you these events every single month. Now, my job is so easy today, I gotta tell you. These women just speak so easily and so eloquently about their creative process, about their technical process, how they actually create what they create, and their inspirations. It's just going to be a pleasure to sit back and listen to them with all of you. Before we get to that, however, let's do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. If you look at the bottom there, we've got a chat function and a Q&A function. The chat is there for you to talk to your fellow attendees. If you hit that little chat bubble, a sidebar is going to open up. Now make sure you change the default from hosts and panelists to everyone. And in fact, even if you think maybe you don't want to partake in the chat, I would go ahead and do that right now, just in case, because otherwise no one's going to see your comments except me and our panelists today. And I'm sure you want everyone to see that. And every single time we do one of these 40 or 50 minutes in, I see multiple people who have forgotten to do that, everyone. So make sure you choose everyone from the dropdown so everyone can read your wonderful comments. The Q&A feature is for you to submit questions to our panelists, and feel free to do that as soon as you think of one. You won't be disrupting them. I'm the only one who's going to be checking those out. And at the end, the very end today, is when we will be doing a joint Q&A. I thought that would be kind of fun. Instead of just question, answer, be more like a discussion between two master sculptors with the occasional non-master sculptor butting in. All right, enough of me jabbering. Our first presenter today is Bridgette Mongeon. She is a Houston, Texas sculptor specializing in portraits, figurines, monumental mascots, awards, and posthumous statues. You can find her sculptures across the United States. She's an accomplished writer, author, speaker, and coach. Bridgette spoke about the creation of her in-progress Move One Place On at the spring 2015 LCSNA meeting in Austin. This monumental Mad Tea Party sculpture is now complete and graces Evelyn's Park in Bellaire, Texas. Welcome, Bridgette, everyone.
Hi.
Hi there, just in time, because all of a sudden I have helicopters and all kinds of noise here. So I am going to make myself scarce. Bridgette, I'll see you in 20 or so minutes. How does that sound?
All righty, let's see if we can share my screen and figure all this out. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
I can hear you for sure.
Terrific. I always say sharing my screen is kind of like peeking up my skirt. So it makes me so nervous. Let me pull this over here so you don't see it. Hopefully everybody can see this. So I'm really glad to be here because I'm around those other people who are as mad as I am about Alice in Wonderland. So thank you so much. This was a picture I took in my studio with Clay and at Christmas time, and I just love the way he looks in that hat. Oh, come on, let me see. Okay, so this is the Alice in Wonderland piece as it's at the foundry, and if you look at the bottom, you'll see that it has some risers on it, and that's because that's how they were going to install it. But also look to the right, and you can kind of see Dinah peeking behind the claws that catch. So when you do go to see this sculpture, look, there's 150 things hidden inside the sculpture. And the claws that catch and what is in those claws are part of that. The scene is a 10-foot table. Excuse me. It's in Bellaire, Texas, which is just outside of Houston. It's a 10-foot table with the benches. Alice is sitting at one end, the Mad Hatter's at the other end, and then, of course, the March Hare. The Dormouse is shoved in a teapot. And when you're thinking about the 150 things, it is also, as we all know who have, read that annotated Alice, it's also inconsistencies and things like that. So my client came to me and he said he had seen the one in New York and said he really liked that. he actually tried to buy this and it was, of course, not available. So he asked me if we could do something. And when I found out it was in the public domain, I said, of course we can. So I not only do sculpture and write books, but I'm crazy about literacy and I'm crazy about STEAM education. If you're not familiar with STEAM education, it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And not just put the art in there to say that art is its own entity and should be focused on, but that art is kind of like an interdisciplinary thing. And I think by the time this presentation's over, you'll understand what I mean because I use it so many times. The sculpture started out many years ago as a digital model that I presented to the client. It took me 3 years to get this client to sign the contract. And when I spoke at the conference, he hadn't signed yet. By that time, I was ready to try to find another buyer because I was just so exhausted. But it started out really small. You can see how it's changed. And this computer model just shows the client what we're thinking of doing, how real people will interact with the sculpture, etc. When I got it, even before I got it, I started to look for models. And so if you're a friend of mine, you're probably going to be put in some clothing sometime or another and asked to model for something. So this was a friend of mine, and that's my little Alice model. And then my friend came and he let me dress him up. You know, you got to have a good friend when they allow you to dress them up and stuff. And then you're going to see how big my granddaughter gets as we move through this project. But he was only the model for the body to give me some reference for the body. My brother-in-law, this is a picture at my daughter's wedding. He has since passed. He's the Mad Hatter's face. And she had a photo booth at her wedding, and I found a bunch of these photographs. I wish I could have put them in here. We were trying on hats. There must have been 20 pictures of us in different hats. And I thought, how appropriate that he then became the Mad Hatter. So we have the digital sketch, and then we go to clay. So I'm making this clay maquette where I'm really formulating the idea, you know, the client sold on it. So let me see what I can do. And then I 3D scan that maquette, that clay small piece, and I get it into the computer. Now, what that allows me to do is 2 things. I can put things in and I can sculpt on it differently because I can really zoom in. I could put the teacup in and the watch and the saucer much easier than I could trying to sculpt a little tiny thing. But the other thing that allows me to do is that I can then take that and send that digital file with the G code up to a company called Synapsis. This is actually the torso of the March hare. So they CNC mill it out of urethane foam, and then they send all these pieces back to my studio, and it's like me putting together this puzzle. This urethane foam becomes my armature. So many years ago, there was a different way that you had to make things bigger. And now in the studio, I have this, and it saves me so much time. Again, there's that little child who's going to grow with the sculpture. Then I take the sculpture and I carve and I carve and I carve. And this is a fake photograph because there was no way I would carve on urethane foam without a mask on, because that stuff gets into your lungs and every other crevice. So it is just horrible stuff to work with, but it cuts like butter, and it's really a wonderful process to work with and saves me so much time and money. And in this image, the Mad Hatter kind of looks like he's groping, but he's not. What is happening here is that in the sculpture scene, every character interacts with an empty spot, but I couldn't put them all together in my studio when we were working on them. And in this case, when I'm working on urethane foam, it's out on the porch because the urethane foam never comes into my studio until it's covered with something. It's because that grit is just horrible. So I'm actually looking at an intern who is kind of sitting at a place or standing at a place where the table might be to see how I should sculpt his eyelids and his eyes and to know that they will match. This is the only time the whole scene, this is probably as together as we ever had the scene in my studio. Right after this, we pulled the table apart and we went and made the mold for Alice in the March hare and sent that off to the foundry. But what this did was, I was really excited about it. This woman that's at the end that's kind of crouched down, she's in a position where a wheelchair can be brought up to the table. And I've seen a couple wheelchairs at the sculpture, and I'm so excited that it's inclusive in that way, because they really just fit underneath that sculpture like that was meant for it. So I'm really excited about that. Now, this woman who you saw crouched was also a quilter, and she said, I really would like to be a part of this project. I had so many interns and people help on the project, probably about 12, both digitally and traditionally, here and afar. And her job, I gave her a pattern to go down the table. I really wanted to have like this river, but this of fabric, but it wasn't all, it was all just wonky. And I said, you know, make a crazy quilt, make as much texture as you can in the quilt. And then we married that crazy quilt to the table with another type of tablecloth that we sculpted and all this edging and trim. And this guy is my favorite, although, you know, I guess technically besides the dormouse, there's only the mouse that's in the pool of tears. My sculpture isn't kind of infested. And this little guy lives underneath this tablecloth. I assume he has a family that lives under there, and he comes out and gets your crumbs and takes them back. So I really like that guy. The other thing you're going to find on the table are teacups. Of course, it's a tea party. And what I did with the teacups was I actually took my mom's teacups and I 3D scanned them. And then I took that digital model and enhanced it, because of course the paintings didn't show up. I enhanced it, and then we 3D printed those out and we filled them up, and those are made into bronze. And there just so happens there's 3 cups on the table. I think the cups kind of represent the 3 kids in my family as an homage to my mom, but that was kind of cool how we interacted with that. And I was able to work with a high school on this project as well, that they used as a STEAM education project for their school. So you can see putting clay on. This is usually putting the clay on is what my interns do for me, and then I come back and I do all the detail. That's the way it's supposed to work. But I climb up and down and over and around, and there's the little maquette, and then there's the clay sculpture. And we made it just high enough that I could get it in my studio. And I still have like these scuff marks on the top of my studio ceiling. So here you see the photographs of the reference, then you see the maquette, then you see the foam, and then you see the final clay. And it just so happens my little Alice model was there. So it's quite big compared to children. And then sometimes what I would do is I would take, I'd go find the perfect trim, and I would then line things. And I stiffen these up with glue. Excuse me. Off with their heads. So after it's all done sculpting, everything in my studio off with their heads is kind of like a saying anyway, whether I'm sculpting on, you know, Booker T. Washington or whatever, because it's really easy for me to flip ahead and sculpt it upside down. Otherwise, things sometimes get skewed. I'm trying to reach over a monumental piece. So off with their head is just a normal thing. But in this case now, the sculpture is done and we're ready to make a mold. It just so happens that I do my seams with playing cards, which is appropriate for this sculpture project. And then the other part of it is you see down here, there is this rubber, we paint rubber on it. And on top of the rubber, we have to have a mother mold, what they call a mother mold, and that holds the rubber in place. So this is fiberglass. So it's a really dirty job, but it works perfect for us. And Alice's chair had many, many pieces. Once the pieces are done, it's taken to the foundry, and the foundry then coats a layer of wax inside of that sculpture. So it's a really thin layer of wax, and then they take that wax and they bring it to the slurry room where they dip it into the slurry and they make a ceramic shell on it. Many, many times they dip it to get just right consistency. And from that, the ceramic shell is then burned out in an oven, and that burned out space, that all of the wax comes out, and then the foundry puts the molten bronze in there. So it's a fascinating process to watch. And just FYI, some of these processes are being infiltrated by digital technology now, which is really kind of exciting for me. And now here they have to weld everything together. And it's interesting because they're welding things together and they don't know where the 150 things are. So I have to go back and go, whoops, you wipe something out by that weld. Could you do this, this, and this? So I was really painstakingly looking over everything to make sure that the textures match and that things are added on right, but mostly that I haven't lost any of my 150. And then from Bastrop, Texas, to Houston is about, I don't know, 2-3 hour drive. Excuse me. They put it on a flatbed truck. They do not cover it. So this is the way it came through Texas. And then the crane came and set it in place. I do have to say that probably the most difficult thing about this whole job was that in the middle of it, talk about off with your heads, the foundry that this was originally went under. And I had to go and rescue Alice. And it was a very, very difficult and trying year that year trying to do it. I think it really took a toll on me, both emotionally and physically. But the final product was well worth it, because here it is in the park. As I said, you can bring your friends, have a picnic, sit down at the table. It's search for the 150. I've seen so many people searching for the 150, and the people who know Lewis Carroll are really, was this in it? Is this something? Did you do something from this chapter? So it's kind of fascinating. And I love my Cheshire Cat. He's kind of got a beatnik look to him. And you know, that's an inconsistency, because we all know the Cheshire Cat was not at the tea party. So there you go. There's another inconsistency. The Mad Hatter's chair and the Mad Hatter, I call this the dude seat. It's at the perfect angle. So do kick back in that chair, because you put your feet up and it just feels, I don't know how I did that, because I certainly couldn't have tried it out in clay. But you can see there's I used a lot of the original Tennell illustrations. That's what I went by when I was looking for reference and research. There's a ton of things hidden in this chair. I like that her yarn goes all the way around and up to a ball. Of course, the lion and the unicorn, and the flamingo heads, and it's just a fun chair. It was a fun chair to work with. We actually had somebody CNC this chair out in wood from a design that I had. You can also bring your chess set and play chess. And a lot of the children spend most of their time underneath the table, because there's 60 things hidden under the table alone. And in hindsight, if I could have, I would have sculpted the caucus race all under the underside of the table, but I ran out of time. This is Ernie Manous from PBS Channel 8 came, and this is my favorite place to sit and take a picture. It is really a great selfie spot. But I asked Ernie, I said, Ernie, you've lived in New York and you've seen the one in New York. What do you think? Compare the two. I mean, they're totally different pieces of art. But he said he really liked the one in Houston better than the one in New York. And the reason being is because when you go to see the one in New York, if you climb on it, you kind of feel like you're committing a felony. But by the very nature of this sculpture being a table and chairs and inviting people in, that makes it more inviting. And so he likes ours better. Along with the table and the chairs, there's also this pedestal, which is the dedication plaque. And there's mouse on a leaf, but right above here, you'll see the foot of a rabbit who's jumping down a hole. The white rabbit is the only character that's not large. And I would really love to see him on the median outside the park, running towards the park. And if I could find a backer for that, I certainly would do that. So it compels you to walk around the backside of this thing, because when you do, there's all sorts of things back here. The rabbit is falling down the hole, and then there is this lovely, I really love this. This is going to be one of the ornaments that we make for Christmas. This is embedded into the side of it. There's an Alice falling, so there's actually two Alices. There's the big Alice and this Alice falling. And the kids like to go to the Hall of Doors and the Pool of Tears, and then you can see the cards that paint the roses red. So you just got to look around everywhere for things. Check out the buttons. The buttons have so much stuff, and so just look at all the buttons. You can't go wrong by looking at the buttons. And then here's another thing that's in the claws that catch, which is Humpty Dumpty. And so when I needed a model for the Alice in Wonderland and the falling, I went on the neighborhood forum and I said, I'm looking for a 7-year-old little girl, a family that will loan me their 7-year-old little girl in a trampoline. I would like to dress her in a dress, and I want to be able to shoot pictures up her skirt. And I'm thinking, these guys are going to think I'm crazy, you know, like but a lot of my neighbors know what I do, so they know. But this was so much fun. And so she just kept jumping over and over again to get the pictures, and we got such great pictures of falling Alice's that way. And this is one of my favorite. So it was really helpful for me to have that to work on the little tiny falling Alice. So the park really wanted me to give up the list of 150. Matter of fact, I kind of, like, you've got to give this up. It's part of the sculpture. We need a check off list. And I said, that's not why I hit 150 things. First of all, the client did not pay me to hide 150 things. They paid me to do a sculpture, which I did. I would not release the 150. I said, that's not what Alice is about. Alice is about curiosity. I wanted to encourage the kids to go to the literature and find it. So when you're looking, this is a detective book, that's free printable, that's available on the alicesculpture.com website. You have to find 4 things. What is it that you're finding in the sculpture? Where is it in the sculpture? Where is it in the story? And then the final thing is, what is the special significance to either the sculptor, the author, or the illustrator? And so those are the 4 things that you have to find when you're looking for stuff. So I always say defend the A and go with STEAM, because that STEAM and the education of STEAM and how I work art within this has been so incredible. And I'm just going to share a little bit with you now. We had a vendor that came and volunteered their time, and these round balls are not part of the little pedestals that are there. These are actually registration, and this is a Faro scanner. And what he did is he came through and he scanned this entire park area. So with this 3D scan of the entire park, I'm trying to find a college that might like to take this scan and help me work with an educational thing for online for the kids, so that they could zoom in and maybe click on something and learn about it. I'd also like to find a college that will do something about like searching for the white rabbit in the park, kind of like a geo thing, or the rabbit keeps moving. So that's 2 ways with colleges and the technology that I'm working with. And then the other way is that we did a second scan, and the second scan is called a blue light scanner. This gets very fine detail, and they came and it took us 9 hours to scan her. All those white dots are registration dots that are on Alice, and they help to register it in the computer. Now I'm going to stop this here because I want to point out something. I'm working on a new book, and people have asked me, is it a children's book? Well, anything Alice is children, but it's also an adult thing. So my Alice is caught in the computer. So it's a book about how to teach kids, that math teachers can use and computer teachers can use to introduce kids to the digital technology and the world inside the computer. And in my design and in my book, Alice is caught in this position. She is in what I call the nothing, because if you've ever worked with computer technology, you know that all this space out here, you're in Cartesian system, in that you could bring something, like you could import something into the computer and think you haven't imported it, but it's way far away. And there's no way to really know where something is. And Alice is contemplating this in my story, and that she's, unlike the other stories of which I would never compare myself to Lewis Carroll, but she's caught right here. She realizes that she can't move, and she discovers that she's data dense and kind of heavy, which really irritates her. How rude would anybody call her dense or heavy? But she's caught in this computer, and I call it the nothingness. And it's interesting because she's also contemplating the nothingness, as Alice would. Is nothing really nothing? If I name it, isn't it something? And so I really like this whole idea. Now I'm also going to pause it here if I can, because if you look inside of her cup, you'll see a crocodile in her cup. How doth the little crocodile? So, and you'll also see the bottle. So it did collect a lot of the data that was needed. There's Dinah. And so in the book that I'm writing for about her caught in the computer, she's in this pose and she can't move. Now, just to show you how well that gets it, the 3D scan, this is the 3D scan, and this is the original. And I have to say that we did, because we are going, the reason why I was doing this was also because I wanted to go small. I wanted to make a small maquette that I could sell in bronze of the scene. And to do this, if you're going big to small, you do lose detail. So I did have to beef up some of the textures. Also in the sculpture, when I'm revealing these things, the 150, I'm revealing them in riddle and rhyme. Because why not? Because it's fun, and why just tell people? So the title of the sculpture is the same as what Hatter bellows as places are changed. Master of ceremonies, he must shout, move one place on, I'll move about. So the title of my sculpture is called Move One Place On. And I encourage you that when you do go, if you're going with friends and family, to play this little Move One Place On game.
2, 3, go one place on. All right. Yeah.
And I like to bang the table just because it's noise and it's fun. And if you are caught, if you want to get in Alice's chair, because it's such a special place to be, you could always tell the people you want to play the Move One Place On game and then move yourself into the chair. So the other one is this clue number 7 or 8 or whatever, Tech Mary's Clay in Wonderland. The Hatter steps in and lends a hand. Not from Texas, but Utah it came, not Victorian, but rather plain. Because Sandra and Martin liked their tea, an homage to a man you now do see. And you'll notice that in the scene, this teapot doesn't look Victorian like the rest of the scene. And the reason being is because it's kind of a famous teapot. It's also a character in this story. This is a Molito teapot. It's otherwise known as the Utah teapot. And the reason why it's famous is because Professor Newell from the University of Utah in 1975 decided that he needed to create the first computer graphics, which of course he did with math. I think Lewis Carroll would really like, Charles Dodson would really like all of this. And so he did it with math. And reason why it was so hard is because it was Bezier surfaces, it cast shadow on itself. So you will see this teapot in The Simpsons and Toy Story, and there are even little collectibles that Pixar does that they give out at conferences. And so of course I would use this teapot in my sculpture. And now in my story with these kids and the Alice in Wonderland or the Alice in the Computer, Molita is one of the main characters who is trying to tell Alice why she can't move, because she is too dense, because she is data heavy. Now, when I teach the kids and I go and talk to STEAM, I always bring this thing because it helps the kids to understand that if I say to the kids, if you had, if those nails or those pins were smaller, what would happen? And, oh, well, we'll get more detail. Well, indeed you would. So they get to understand that the more pins, the more points, the more detail. I also talk to them about they do these puzzles of putting things together in layers. And this teaches them that that's how 3D printing happens, is in layers. And then finally, I really love these 3 pictures. And when I'm thinking about these 3 pictures, I'm thinking about another character or 2 characters in the book called the Poly Twins. The one on the left, although this is not the poly twins, this just shows you. The one on the left is low poly and the one on the right is high poly. And low poly, the reason why we have to have low polys in the computer is because if you have, like Alice in the computer, she's got too much information, she's too dense. So you try to render her, it takes too long. So artists will work with a lower poly creature or figure and then up it to a higher poly, but you got to know exactly where that is. And this is a really good example. When the 3D scan comes back to me, it comes back in triangles or points. And these triangles, when I say decimation, we have to take out some of the geometry, but we need to know just how much geometry to take out so that you still have the detail, but that but it's less dense. And so there is this fine thing. Now, these 3D scans do so much detail. It's much more than I need or could use. I also have these free printables so that the kids can learn about vertices and edges and faces and geometry. And meanwhile, they're creating these. There's both a dodecahedron and there's also a triangle for the younger kids. And if anybody wants those are there too. So I wrote a book in 2015 on 3D technology and fine art and craft, exploring 3D printing, scanning, sculpting, milling, and it talked about all this. And I talked to my publisher and I said, would you do one, could I do one, and would you publish it on Alice in Wonderland? and walking it through, and they said yes, they would. But I really want to try to find another publisher, because I just don't think they usually publish, Focal Press publishes software books, and I just think it would be better to have it with a different publisher. So if you know anybody, let me know. I'm also looking for creative ways to teach STEAM education through the Alice and through the literature. I'd like to be able to collect a bunch of these and put them on the website so that teachers can go and use the literature, whether it's you're teaching physics because the rabbit is going down the hole and how long does it take? Well, it depends upon the hole, and the kids are making a hole out of paper tubes or something. Those type of creative ways to use the literature, incorporate it into teaching these wonderful things. Now, the book on Alice and the computer, which I'm on chapter like 4, I'd love to chat with anybody about this if they're interested. Pick their brains on creative ways to do this, because these are the things that I'm covering. The binary system, geometry, we already talked about her being data dense and heavy, computer space, the nothingness, and of course the Cartesian system. 3D scanning, what 3D scanning means and how it happens with it going and measuring a point of light and coming back. G-code, and of course coding and how that's a language. And then, you know, how big is she? She's trying to figure out how big she is. Am I a megabyte? Am I a terabyte? And I'm telling you, some of these computer terms like nibble and bit, they're just, you want to write about them. So I'm looking for an agent or agents for literature for both adult and children to get these books out. I have other books I'm looking at too. And I'd love to talk and chat about creative ways to write about these above things if anybody ever wants to sit and talk. I also have these, sorry, my dog keeps coming back and forth. Also have these ornaments that we're making, that we're taking the hidden objects and then we're creating these ornaments and selling them. So there's Lewis Carroll, which you'll find on the back of the chair, some of the doors. And now that I have a 3D printer in studio, we're going to be 3D printing some of the more advanced pieces and trying to put them in. And you can find me just about everywhere. My creative sculpture website, thealicesculpture.com. So I'd love to hear from you. And without further ado, let me introduce, or let my people, the people that are hosting this, introduce Karen. Karen and I met at 3D Printing World Expo in 2014. She is the person that actually introduced me to your organization, which I was so excited about. I was speaking there and presenting the Alice sculpture. And so with that, I will sign off and say thank you.
Well, thank you, Bridgette. Oh my goodness, it's so great to hear about your book, in addition to Move One Place On, of course. And actually, I am going to read a comment from Stephanie Lovett in the chat here, because I feel like she phrases this better than I ever could. Bridgette, we are so grateful for your fantastic presentation in Austin. This project is unbelievably thoroughly thought out and so completely in the spirit of Alice. The book is a classic because it too has space for everyone to interact with it. I also admire your commitment to including and educating people of all ages in the processes of art and technology. So thank you, Stephanie, for, again, phrasing that better than I ever could. The thing I was going to add is I had a real life tea party several years ago, and I kept yelling, "Move One Place On," and nobody moved. And that was devastating. Really, really sad. All right. So thank you, Bridgette. And let's get started with Karen. And a reminder, if you put anything in the Q&A, we will definitely get to that towards the end. And let me pull up Karen's very impressive biography. One moment. Master sculptor, Karen Mortillaro is collected not only for her figurative work, but also for her illusions, conceived in the imagination and executed with a detailed distinction that collectors find astonishing. Her work is found in both public and private collections. Karen is a longtime member of the LCSNA and gave a tour of the foundry, where her anamorphic sculptures are cast at the fall 2013 LCSNA meeting. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to spend an afternoon with you. It was fascinating to hear Bridgette's presentation. And what is so fascinating about sculpture, and what Bridgette was emphasizing, was that sculpture is interactive. And it's something that you can walk around, you can touch, you can feel it. It can be on a gigantic monumental scale like Bridgette's, or it can be on a micro scale. I'm sorry, somebody said that my camera is shaky. I could not get you on my laptop, so I'm using my phone. So I hope I can hold it still enough, and that accommodates that waviness. So with my work, I work on a micro scale, very small. And just to back up a little bit, my interests are in light, color, and illusion. And I have a YouTube video that explains the process that I've gone through over the years and to where I am today with the 3D anamorphic work. In talking about anamorphia, it's a very old art form. It goes back to the Chinese, to the Renaissance. And in the Renaissance, it was considered a magical type of visual form. And it was in the Renaissance where perspective was highly developed. And with this, you could put perspective onto a wall. And if you drew at an angle, you would get one image. If you walked down the hall and looked in front of that drawing, that perspective, you would see a different illusion, a different image. Holbein, a painter in the Renaissance, did a study of ambassadors. And there's this wonky looking shape in that painting. Well, if you stand at just the oblique right angle, you would see a skull. Well, these things were considered magical at the time. And moving up into time, into the 18th century, when industry could take and make tubes, and let me see, I have a little example. This one is mylar. They could take that tube and put it in front of, and let's see if I can do this. They could put it in front of a distorted circular grid. And on that grid, and I'm using in my example, Lewis Carroll's Cheshire Cat in the Tree. And there is a square grid drawn. And then on the circular grid, whatever information is in the right square grid will find its way to the circular grid. When that image is then colored in, kind of looks like this. The viewer would probably see something like this. And I will see with this handheld phone, if I could show you. And what's very interesting is because we're working on a flat screen, things do not always show. But I'm going to turn the camera and we're going to look at, and hopefully you will see the reflection of the cat. And instead of being distorted, there is some resemblance of normality. Well, I got an invitation to do a self-portrait for a show. And I thought, well, I can do my portrait in a different way. Rather than just doing a regular sculpture, I will try to do pulling from anamorphia. I will try to pull from the past, but make it contemporary. And I thought all I had to do was get a photograph of myself, make a square grid, make the circular grid, and put the mylar, a cylindrical mirror. And then I could put a clay on top of that. So I tried that, and I'm going to take the camera again and just take and see if you see that. There would be an image, a drawing that represents a photograph of myself right here. And right here would be a flat mirror. And this is the grid. This is the mylar. So there is a circular mirror and a flat mirror. So once I had my drawing done, I thought, well, that's pretty easy. Now all I have to do is put the clay on it. And I use an oil-based clay. It becomes soft with warmth, especially of your hand. And the tools that I would use are just regular sculptor's tools. Well, once I started to lay the clay down, I started to cover over the drawing. And I thought, this is not going to work. So I had a conversation with myself, and maybe many of you do that too. And I said, self, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I think what we're going to do is just sit here in front of the circular mirror, looking into the flat mirror, and you're going to sculpt. I said, okay. And so I did. And so the very first piece that I created is this self-portrait. And instead of, well, I made it out of clay, then made a mold. And that mold I poured is called moulage. It's a French material, and it's a very hard wax. And I thought, since this is a self-portrait, I think I will use my cosmetics. And so I have my Clinique cosmetics, and put my makeup on, and it worked out very well. Well, I got fascinated with this. And I remember as a child, my mom, when we would have these very fancy meals, and let me see, I've got my, here it is. We would bring out all the good silverware, good china, and mom would be working in the kitchen. I'd set the table. I would usually sit down first while waiting for company. And one day while I was waiting, and I was admiring my place setting, I looked at my soup spoon. And this is from that set. And as I sat looking at the spoon, I noticed that the ceiling chandelier was reflecting, and it was in space. And I thought, that is most interesting. And I tried to grab it. I tried to grab the chandelier that was floating. And naturally, my hand just couldn't grab anything. So after I finished the self-portrait, well, I'm going to back up again too, because reflective surfaces have been fascinating over the years. And as that young child, I must have been maybe 13, 14 years old. After the dinners, my responsibility was to dry the dishes. And I remember my mom one day saying, stop dancing. And I thought, what? And what I was doing is all the good silver was being stacked up, the silver teapot, the sugar, the creamer, anything that mom could bring out, for these festive meals, we were using it. And what I was doing is looking at my reflection into these curved surfaces, even the toaster with its rounded corners. And I could make myself a cyclops. I could walk in and there would be one eye, pull back, and I could see my face, becoming elongated. And I was just fascinated. So moving forward, I brought these experiences into my sculpture. And so I wanted to take this a step further. And so what I did is I took a cylinder and I cut that cylinder in half, and I juxtaposed the two ends, and I made a wave mirror. And now I said, what can I do with this? And I was sharing my studio with a colleague from college, and she taught story illustration, and that was Donna Westerman. And she's a wonderful printmaker. And she said, well, of course you'll want to do Alice. And I said, Alice? I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'll have to get that book and read it. And so I did. I got Alice, and I decided to start exploring characters. And just like Bridgette, she mentioned Maquettes. I'm going to turn the camera again so that you can see what is in front of me. And the ideas start with drawings in a book, my notebook, and then small maquettes are made. And those maquettes were first made out of clay. And just as Bridgette mentioned that from the clay molds are made, and waxes are made, and then investment, and then waxes are melted out, and then bronze is poured in. And so this is my interpretation of the White Rabbit. So once I start to go through all these characters, I had to do Alice. And that's what I started with. And what I found is that in a parabolic, the inside of a mirror, reflections will appear off the surface and in space, just like the experience I had with my spoon. While on the convex side, anything that is distorted will reflect just like the previous examples throughout history would do. Well, now I had two illusions, the convex and the concave. And so I started exploring Alice. My very first meeting was up at Fresno with Carpenter. I just remember how fascinated I was with how many volumes of books there are for children. And then also for the camaraderie that I started to make. And from that experience, I just started to enlarge all this investigation from chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5. And what I've done is I've incorporated from just a tabletop item, I started to design the tables themselves so that the table legs are designed for that chapter, as well as the items on top. And I found that working with the S-shaped mirrors has been interesting. Like Bridgette is experiencing, there is new technology. And so recently, and let me see here, I've got some examples. I happened to be at a G4G meeting, a gathering for Gardner. One of our members had put my name forward. And while there, you have a chance to network. And I was asking, at lunchtime, could anyone put me in touch with someone who could help me to do 3D modeling? And right then and there, they pulled out their phones. They started to send emails. They handed me a contact. And I started to visit David Bachman. And here is David and I. He is a mathematician, teaches mathematics at Pitzer College. And we started to investigate some shapes. Interesting that Bridgette mentioned the teapot, because it's the teapot, and I'm going to come back down here, that we started to work with. And my little experiment, and we have a little model. Let me see here. We have a little model, and the little lid comes off, but it's a start. And what's interesting is, like Bridgette mentioned, you could make these teapots or these 3D models any size. You can enhance them, you can add to them, take away from them. So it is a fascinating process. And what I'm finding is how mathematics is playing such an important part. My work is 3D geometry. And one other item that David and I started to work on was the Alice. And so I'm going to come in this way. This is a 3D distorted Alice. And yet when she reflects into the mirror, she corrects herself. And this is the Alice, and I happen to have her right here with me so that I can share this with you. Just like Bridgette commented, you get back 3D model, and you can then lay up clay, and that's what this brown material is over the blue material that the scan was made out of. So she is going to be part of this. Alice is going to be part of chapter 7. And what I find so fascinating is the interaction that people have with the sculpture. In the piece Pig and Pepper, I have a very flat, I'm going to come around here, a very flat piece that is standing away from the mirror. But when that flat piece reflects into the mirror, it creates the smile of the cat. Also, the pig, when it reflects into the concave part, it creates the Cheshire cat. And I find these kind of, I call them ahas. And what I especially like is watching how adults, as well as children, react to the pieces. And let me see here. I'm not showing any of the current work. Oh, some of you who may not be familiar with the sculptor's techniques, Bridgette was commenting how she's doing so much of her work in the computer. Until I've gotten into or introduced to the computer and 3D modeling, I have been doing all of my work with clay or wax so that I can have figures that are just bodies. I have all kinds of legs and arms. Here's some arms. And then I have a variety of heads. These are all wax. So I've made a clay model, poured lots of waxes. Bridgette is probably saying, oh my God, you could do this in the computer. I know. And then I will take and combine all of these. And what I'm finding is I'm looking forward to exploring the computer techniques, mainly because it would save a great deal of time. I'm thinking about the last 4 chapters, and I have mirrors for all of them, last 5, I think, except for 2. And the last chapter will not have a mirror. And what I kind of whet the appetite. What I have here is a photograph, and this is a photograph of Eastman Kodak, George Eastman, rather, not George Kodak, but George Eastman, the founder of Kodak Company. And you look at that and you say, what the heck is that? Well, if I take that photograph and I make a cone, such as this, and I put that like so and face you, you will see a portrait, a recognizable portrait of George Eastman. Well, my chapter 12 is going to be an explosion as all the cards and Alice, the court, all the little animals, all the teapots and cookies and pastries and teacups are flying. They will create the portrait of Lewis Carroll, which will be the conclusion of which I think now is a life's work. It's turning into that. So with that, I think I've covered pretty much information that I can share. So I look forward to talking to everybody at the social hour.
Excellent. And yes, I did just put the link in there. Everyone, don't go there yet. We're going to have our Q&A, but afterwards we will have a social hour. And Karen, thank you so much. And I want you to know, doing that on your phone, I think it actually lent you a little more freedom to walk around and show us things that absolutely looked great. So no need to worry about that. And Bridgette, I see, has returned here and for the Q&A. So yeah, you can both just, I would say, stay unmuted. And you at home, I would put it on gallery view for this section, you know, the view thing in the top corner there, so you can see everybody at once. Now we do have two very specific questions. Actually, Karen, I'm going to ask you first. These are both from anonymous attendee. Are they the same anonymous attendee? I don't know. They might be different. But Karen, could you again share the name of the mathematician and the school he is at? I think you mentioned him 5 or 10 minutes ago.
Yes, David Bachman, and he's at Pitzer College in Claremont.
Okay. I see. Bridgette, are you writing that down?
Of course. I take notes on everything.
And then Bridgette, another scholastic type question. How did you manage to get the participation with the high school, and if and how have you continued that collaboration?
I will collaborate with high schools in education in any way I can. With the Alice in Wonderland, what I did was, it was actually my high school. I went back to speak at my high school in Western New York. And they had a computer program there, and I talked to the computer program guy and I said, would you like to collaborate on this? I had originally thought that the kids would be able to do something that would go into the sculpture. But it was a little challenging for them. So what I provided to them was the 3D scan of one of my mom's teacups, and I said, design it any way that you would like. And I think what that does for students is that they feel like they're working on a real project. It's not like just something that's made up. They're working on something that's real. And so I would be happy to provide that 3D scan to anybody that would like to, then any school that would like to take it and then maybe use that as a class where the kids take the teacup and they design one of the teacups for Alice in Wonderland. Isn't that a lovely thing? And we fill the teacups, because you cannot have empty teacups, which I guess is a contradiction. You can't have empty teacups, otherwise it'll fill with water. So we had to fill the teacups with something. So the kids could also then take their computer program and fill the teacups, and we put things either floating in them or doing something or hidden stuff. But that would be a fun project, depending on what the software programs the schools have for their computer. And I'm also working on another project, which is Booker T. Washington, where I'm working really in conjunction with them as I'm creating this Booker T. Washington sculpture that we're putting everything online, and we're actually creating STEAM programs for the kids along, and they're creating their whole area where this Booker T sculpture is going. So it's pretty fascinating to see how that's coming about. So if there's any schools that that would like me to come and talk on Zoom, I'd love to be able to do that. Anything that we could collaborate together, let's do it.
Oh, what a generous offer. Now, I'm actually wondering, do either of you have a question for each other? When you were listening to each other's presentations, did you think, oh, I gotta ask Karen about that later, or, oh, I need Bridgette to elaborate on that?
What I'm so fascinated is that Bridgette can do so much of her own 3D modeling. I'm dyscalculic, and math is like such a foreign language to me. What I do is intuitive, and I just find that fascinating, and to see how her interest has woven into so many other areas that especially affect children or learners.
And my response to that is that as somebody that works as somebody of my age that works both traditionally and digitally, by the time I get back to the computer to work digitally, I forget what I know, and I kind of have to refresh my brain. So it's a really challenging thing. And there's pluses and minuses to working in the computer. When I work in the studio, I can be guaranteed that when I go in that studio, the sculpture is going to be there, but that's not the case with a computer. It could just disappear, or worse yet, it could be, something could happen to it where you can no longer work with it. So there are those pluses and minuses. And I always say, for me as an artist, I've written about it over and over again, and I don't know how else to describe it, is that I need to touch it, that my brain works better if I touch it. So even if I work at the computer, if I can't touch it, there's a disassociation there, and it just It really, really is hard for me. And there are so many programs to learn and to use. Like I work with ZBrush and Mudbox, but there's so many other programs. And my thought to you would be to ask your mathematician what program is he using, because I know that a lot of people have just assumed that what is happening in the computer, and there was for the Society for Children Book Writers and Illustrators, they had Pixar on, and they were talking about how they make movies and the different steps and the rendering and the pipeline of all of it. And a lot of people don't realize that some of the stuff is really new, like physics in the computer, getting physics to work well in a computer, or having hair to look like it's real in digital animation. So when the Monsters Inc. came out, everybody was going, wow, do you see the hair? It looks real. And so I watch these things and I'm fascinated, but again, there's so much data there that their computers to render it is just astronomical.
Yeah.
And by the way, everyone, dyscalculia is a condition that affects the ability to acquire mathematical skills. When Karen used that word last week in our little dress rehearsal, Bridgette and I were both, dyscalculia, what's this? And we took a note. I was not previously familiar with that word personally. Let's see, we've got a brand spanking new question. Bridgette, how did you decide what size to make the figures for Move One Place On?
How tall my ceilings were in my studio. I've often had to move my studio to a warehouse somewhere, and it's not something I like to do. I did that with Eve, with the last one I worked on. She was 14 foot tall, and it's just so much work. I like being able to go to my backyard and walk. So, and the cost. Bronze, as Karen can tell you, her husband owned a foundry. Bronze is extremely expensive. And if you add just a little piece to something, it can make the, add a couple inches and it, the price goes up, so it was really what my client could afford. And back to your math thing, I'd like to add to that, because Karen, you say, you're bad with math. And I think, but I think that we as little girls grow up with this idea that girls can't be good in math, and so I think that this is a really interesting concept to explore with kids. And I try not to say it when I'm talking to kids, because to be perfectly honest, I don't feel like I'm good with math either. So the computer programs do everything for you. I don't have to do like Newell did. They do it all. So it's really fascinating.
I agree with you, because what plays over in my mind was my Algebra 1 instructor telling me that if I promised never to take another math class, she would pass me with a C. Yeah. And she said, she would tell us, I give my husband the quizzes every morning, and if he can do it, then I figure you can do it. And that was Algebra 1, whatever it was, junior high, high school. Yeah.
That's an awfully strange standard if her husband could do that.
I know.
I think those things get in your subconscious, and then you can't do it. But a lot of, and it's fun when you start to get into the computer programs, because like in ZBrush, there's a thing called deformations, and there's a whole list, like 20 or 30 things. You want to make a hole, you want to skew it, you want to make it stretch. And if you press on one of those things, the coolest stuff that can happen. And so, and I also relate that to the idea with STEAM in the schools, the art, because Karen, you said, the question says, what can I do with this? And that is a question artists ask on a regular basis, especially when it comes to technology. And so like Joris Larman, which I covered in my book, he decided he wanted to 3D print bridges, and he 3D printed bridge. They printed the bridge as they went across and met in the middle. And who thinks of that stuff? I mean, you artists have a tendency to think outside the box. And I think that's really an interesting thing when you're adding the A in STEAM.
I'm going to put this little drawing up. This is a Cantonary bridge. And when I saw this during one of our Lewis Carroll lectures, it grabbed my attention because Cantonary and cat and the Cheshire cat smile, you know, and that's what laid the premise for, let me see if I can get it. This,
That.
you know,
Very fascinating.
And you know,
so it's in,
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think a nice addition to this conversation is Stuart in the chat here. Stuart Moskowitz says, we should distinguish between mathematical skills and arithmetical skills. Karen, your intuition is quite mathematical. Algebra and calculating are only a small part of math. So thank you, Stuart, for that input. I agree with that.
Thank you.
I'm going to write that down later. Keep the chat up so I can write it later.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I can send you both a transcript later of all
That's
of it.
great.
So don't
Yeah.
worry. All right, let's see. We've got some more questions piling up here. Peter Hamp, I have to admit, I missed whatever comment you're referring to. He asks, Western New York, how far west? Loved your presentation, Bridgette.
I'm originally from Buffalo, New York.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? I'm from Jamestown. This is so strange.
Yeah, hey, we're
Yeah,
just,
but
we're
you're
neighbors.
It's like,
Yeah, Arundequite, Rochester, New York.
wow.
I had no
Yeah.
idea we had 3 Western New York people here.
Yeah, that's why I have that picture of George Eastman.
Of course. Yeah, Rochester. All right, let me get back to the Q&A here. Another anonymous attendee, a lot of shy people today. Speak to how you see them in your own mind. Do you see it first or after you start the work? I think that's for both of you, or I don't know if that's referring to a comment that was just made recently,
Yeah.
I have to say.
I see the piece in my mind's eye. And I can take and rotate it, turn it upside down, see the materials that it's made out of. Yeah.
Wow, I'm impressed. I'm in there pushing the clay around going, Of course, most of my stuff is like commission work anyway. So I'm working with somebody, you know, creating somebody. But in the case of Alice, there were things that were in my mind's eye, but that they morphed as they came out.
Yeah.
And I think you allow that morphing to happen because then you just kind of go, oh, well, that's kind of cool the way that worked out.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Alice, I would not have done Alice the way that I did her. If I could do one do-over, I would do Alice's face differently. But I was told I could not do her the way I wanted to do her, and so I wish I could have done that over. So and you know, that's another element though, because our emotions are so much a part of our art that gets sucked into the work, and that people, I wrote a whole book on this, which again, I need to publish some of these books, because I sculpt a lot of deceased loved ones and the interaction that was happening between the parents and myself and the surviving relatives. It's just a fascinating study. But so much of our emotions go into the art that, and there is science behind this, that it then transfers to the viewer. And I think that's a really important element in our creative process. So there's a lot to what we do in the morphing of the art.
I think too, I know with the sculpture, I can see it in my mind's eye. I think I'm always asking questions. And for example, what if I cut a cylindrical mirror tube in half and then just suppose them and join them? What happens? I don't know. Well, let's try it and then let's see what does happen. And so with that serendipitous inquiry, I found that I had 2 illusions. I had the concave and the convex reflections. Well, now that opened up, you know, a whole new area. And now with the computer, I'm able to try a lot of new approaches for reflections, which is very exciting because the second half of the series is going to be different. And one thing that I didn't mention is that because Alice is a written story, I have taken each table chapter and I'm going to be printing that chapter, binding it, and there's a drawer in the table. And when you open the drawer, there will be that chapter. Now, my question is, do I have a book or do I have a sculpture and a book? You know, so anyway, that will be the second version of the series.
And I think also in relating this, the type of work that you do is it's your own work. You're in your own creative process. And I'm a commissioned artist, so I had a job I had to do.
Yeah.
And therefore I have to work within those limitations. And I usually go from one commission to another. So the only place that I feel I can be creative is in my writing, because I really don't have any time to spend in the studio just doing to do. So, but I try to float that and morph that into this process in my, the morphing and having my own thoughts come into the process, or lead the client in it. You know what I mean?
All right, we have someone requesting if Karen could show some of her completed chapters. I'm going to put a link to your website in the chat there, because I don't think you have any lying around right where you're at.
No, the YouTube video, you can Google Karen Mortillaro, anamorphic sculpture, Alice, any combination thereof.
All right, excellent. And I will put the links to both your websites in the chat actually as well. Now, Dana Noon, who asked a question earlier as well. Karen, because you work with mirrors, did you deliberate over using Looking Glass instead of Wonderland characters, or was it always going to be Wonderland?
Oh, this has taken over 30 years. And so if I could speed up the process, with the computers, or if I have little elves and helpers, maybe, but no, this will take a few more years to finish up. But thank you. I mean, it would be wonderful to see her coming through. And on chapter 1, I do have the rabbit as he comes down the rabbit hole. On one side of the mirror is the world of reality, and the rabbit is going into the rabbit hole. So you see his little butt. And when you come around to the other side of the mirror, as he's coming into, you see his face and ears. So that's a little exploration of going through a mirror.
Wonderful. Yeah, just no pressure. Just, the public is clamoring for it is all they're saying.
Okay. All right, Dana. I'll give thought.
And also, I will say, everyone in the chat who is basically requesting the two of you to come speak to their classes and things like that, I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to pass the chat on to them afterwards. And with your permission, I will give you your email addresses, you people asking these questions, so that everyone can hook up after this.
And just as Bridgette is open for vendors or people in the computer families, all that type of thing, I'm also interested in connecting up with mathematicians and people in the computer scanning and printing. But I'm in the LA area.
Excellent.
Can I ask Karen a question?
You may, please do.
Has your work affected your dreams? Do you dream in this? What is it? What is it going
on? No. I will say sometimes just before I go off to sleep, I'll get an idea. It's that relaxed state, and I'll try to jot it down.
That's what I call the magic. That's what I tell my granddaughter is the magical place between asleep and awake. And if you don't know about this magical place, everybody should. There's 2 times you have it a day, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, and the most incredible things happen. So anyway, that's my stand on that. Everybody should know about that magical place.
Lewis Carroll talks about it in the Easter greeting, right? He gives a very beautiful description of that moment when you first wake up and you're not quite awake yet.
I call it the aha. That aha moment.
And it's a great way to get your kids to go to sleep, because you go, did you get to the place? Because I keep telling my granddaughter, did you find the door? And she'll go, Grandma, I couldn't find the door. I tried and tried, couldn't find it. And then there's a guy that I tell her that could be there. Mine's Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. Hers is Take. So, and I said, it doesn't have to be a door. It could just be a hedge. You're walking through a hedge. You just got to let it flow, sweetheart. And it's a good way to get your kids to go to sleep. Go find the door.
Well, Karen, I think you're lucky that you don't dream about your work because I worked on a zombie video game for 6 months and I had some pretty extreme nightmares that whole time. All right, I have a question for both of you. Which character have you found the most challenging and or enjoyable to sculpt? I don't know which one of you wants to take that first.
Ooh, I haven't worked through all the characters yet. I think it's getting easier. Oh, well, no, I still have to do chapters 9 and 10. I think 11 and 12 will be easy because you use a lot of little characters, you know, things like that. The Queen, I think Queen, and also trying to break away from the influence of what's come before me.
Yeah, huge.
You know, that's huge. That's, oh my God, that's.
I boycotted everything while I was working on it. The only thing I wanted was the original. I didn't want to watch anything, see anything, do anything. I didn't want any subconscious influences. Yeah. That's a long time. 7 years it took the total project. So that's a long time.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to avoid.
Yeah, it is really hard to avoid. Who are my favorite? I think it's kind of like, I think doing this artwork has kind of made them more family, if that makes any sense. And so I love them each for different, like I love the Mad Hatter because he is my deceased brother-in-law. You know, so there's this thing there. I'm crazy about the Dormouse just because it was so fun to do. And the March Hare, I think has just and I don't know if it's the way he stands, or where he's placed, but I kind of feel like he is anchored everything. I don't know why. So maybe because where he's placed, maybe because it was at his house. It wasn't the Mad Hatter's house. Yeah, I have feelings for each of them differently, and probably why I want to do the rabbit, because I feel like he wasn't in the party, and he wasn't, but I feel disconnected, and I feel like if I don't, I'm not fulfilled until I do him. So we'll see about that one in my spare time.
Yeah, I know the Tim Burton Alice movies get a lot of flack, but the moment where she enters Wonderland and all the characters were around the table for the Mad Tea Party, I had a little, white rabbits there, Cheshire Cats at the tea party. Like, that was a very exciting moment for me personally. There's a comment here in the chat, which, you know, I try to keep one eye on the chat. It doesn't always work out, but this is from Dana. We have two Danas on today. This is the non-noon Dana. Hypnagogic state is before falling asleep. Hypnopomic is the waking up state. My band's name is Hypnagogic Telegram.
Oh, I love that.
It's so fantastic. Wow. All right, now we have a question from Ellie Schaefer-Salins in the Q&A here, and she is saying, of course, collectors want to know, are you selling any of your work to Alice collectors or non-collectors? I know, Bridgette, you at least have the Christmas ornaments that people can purchase, right?
And I'm ready to do the small, I have the rights to do a 10-inch maquette of the whole scene and a 14-inch maquette. It's bronze, so, you know, Karen knows it's expensive. So if I had a buyer to start that up, I'd give them a really good deal, because I need to have somebody that will invest the money into doing it to get it going. So yes, I'm ready to do the small and the big one, and the 10-inch and the 14-inch. And then the Christmas ornaments are there, but we're just having a fun time, especially getting my own 3D printer, which, you know, I've written about it. I actually was nominated as one of 19 of 30 most influential women in 3D printing after my book came out, which was kind of like, how'd that happen? But I've never owned a 3D printer because they are really temperamental to work with. So now I have a 3D printer. I only turned it on twice. So in both times it didn't work right. So yeah, they are temperamental, but I'm hoping that I think the technology pushes the design and it helps you to figure things out more. So I'm looking forward to that.
And yes, I do have, I have work available. It is for sale. And you can go to my website and There isn't any one gallery though
Gotcha.
for you.
And again, those websites I did put in the chat there, Karen Mortillaro.com and creativesculpture.com. And I actually just got corrected in the chat as well. The D-A-I-N-A is not Dana, it's pronounced Dinah. I think we've all learned today that pronouncing names is not my strong suit, and how wonderful that it's Dinah, like, you know, Alice's cat. All right. Do either of you have any parting words before we go to social hour? I'm sure people will love to engage with you there, actually in person, but did you have any final thoughts for today?
No, it's just, this was a wonderful afternoon. A lovely afternoon.
I totally agree.
I see in the chat that somebody is an artist and a scientist and really into STEAM, and I think that's great because I've talked to so many artists, and I wrote about them in my book about artists that are really pushing the limits. And there's actually a university in Australia which what their job is to take an artist and a scientist and put them together and see what they can do. And so that was the same artist that did he actually made a vial of skin, a coat of skin, and in the gallery the skin would be displayed, and then he'd kill it at the end. And it was so very disturbing to me as I was writing, and he was trying to bring to light that we are so not aware of what's happening in the laboratory. So it was his combination with the science and the artist that brought that to light. So they're in Australia and they're really cool. So I'm excited to see that there are some people that are into science and understand STEAM, and go with STEAM.
Just to add to that, I've always thought that there is no separation between art, mathematics, and science. I think they all go together beautifully.
And I defy anybody to have a science fair without having art. You can't. You got to have a board. You have a poster board. The moment you get a poster board out, you've got art. The moment you make a volcano, you're doing art. So I think it's impossible to separate them. And I'm just so excited to be able to be learning about all this stuff and sharing it with people. And and the kids just get so excited about it. The adults do too. Like Karen, you're going, wow, what else can I do with this program? Or what are my possibilities? And I'm hoping you can find those, and that mathematician can help you to get there, because if you could work in that computer and get past the nothing and not get sucked up into the nothing, I think you'll really enjoy what it can do for you.
Yeah. And before we go, I'm going to need instructions from my iPhone how to join everybody with the after.
You know what, just in case, Karen, I mean, it's on the mass email that went out a day or two ago, but I will email it to you also right after this. Will that help? Perhaps. Okay. All right. And everyone else, hopefully you've had some ample time there there's an actual link. So if you click on that, it should be fine. Although I won't be there for about 30 seconds. So you'll be left hanging for just a little bit, but also it's always a good idea to jot down that meeting ID and passcode, because if the link ever doesn't work, you can just use that to log in. And I want to thank our presenters so much today. This is a fascinating discussion. I especially love the talk at the end. I mean, I love the presentations, but I love the give and take of the discussion afterwards. This joint Q&A was great.
Well, you know, Karen and I could talk a really long time about all of this stuff.
I learned that at dress rehearsal, yes. But that's
great
fun.
So
great. Yeah.
Great
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you both. All right.
Me too.
We'll see, hopefully, just about everyone in just a few minutes at the social hour. Bye.
Bye.